Imagine a hot, silent night in Puerto Rico in the mid-1990s. The stars shone brightly in the sky, but something in the atmosphere felt off. It was as if the wind carried a warning, a bad omen. Amid the darkness, a farmer named Jose walked with his lantern toward the stable, worried about the strange sounds that had interrupted his rest. What he found that night would change his life forever and spark one of the most chilling mysteries of our time. Jose described the scene as something straight out of a nightmare. His sheep, which always waited for him at the stable door, were lying on the ground. Their eyes were glazed, lifeless, and their bodies seemed stiff, as if something had drained their very essence. But the most disturbing thing wasn't the bodies, it was the silence. Not even the crickets dared to sing that night. He approached one of the goats and noticed something even stranger: 2 puncture marks on its neck. There was no blood on the ground or around the wounds. Just those perfectly round marks, as if an unknown predator had extracted every drop of blood with surgical precision. Jose's heart raced. What could have done such a thing? In the weeks that followed, Jose's story began to spread through the small town of Canavanas. But he wasn't the only one. Other farmers began reporting similar scenes. Chickens, sheep, and even dogs found dead, drained of blood, with the same mysterious marks. Soon, the residents grew afraid to venture out at night. Streets that were once filled with laughter and chatter now fell silent at sunset. It was in this climate of fear that the first sightings were reported. People swore they had seen an unusual creature wandering the fields. They described something small but terrifying: red eyes that glowed in the dark, spines along its back, and quick, stealthy movements. Each account seemed more frightening than the last. Tension on the island grew with each passing night. Jose, once known as a pragmatic and fearless man, now avoided going outside after dark. He put up wooden crosses around his property, hoping they might ward off whatever was killing his animals. But deep down he knew it was a desperate act. The town elders began sharing old stories, legends of creatures that inhabited Puerto Rico's mountains and forests. They spoke of something they called El Vampiro de Mocha, a mythical predator blamed for similar attacks decades earlier. Could it be that this creature had returned to haunt the island? Meanwhile, groups of young people, driven by curiosity and a desire to confront their fears, began organizing night patrols. Armed with flashlights and machetes, they vowed to protect their families and lands. But night after night, they returned empty-handed, with no clues about what was truly happening. It was as if the creature knew exactly how to hide. Local media began covering the events, dubbing the phenomenon Chupacabra. It was the beginning of a legend that would quickly transcend Puerto Rico's borders. Journalists interviewed residents and speculated about what could be causing the deaths. Theories ranged from unknown predators to military experiments gone wrong. But no explanation seemed satisfying. And so, a shadow was cast over the island. Puerto Rico, once known for its beauty and hospitality, was now associated with a creature no one could explain. And as people tried to move on with their lives, the fear lingered. After all, what could be hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again? That was the question everyone asked, but no one truly wanted to know the answer. When I first heard about the attacks in Canavanas, I confess I was skeptical. I've always doubted legends and exaggerated stories. But something about the accounts from that small town made me stop and think. These weren't just rumors. They were dozens of residents reporting the same events, with disturbingly similar details. I decided to dig deeper. What I found left me speechless. One of the most striking stories I heard was from Dona Carmen, a strong and determined woman known for raising chickens and goats on her property. She told me that, on an otherwise ordinary night, she was awakened by a strange sound coming from the chicken coop. It was something like a low, rhythmic hiss mixed with the sound of claws scratching against wood. Grabbing her flashlight and a knife, she went to investigate. Carmen described how, as she approached, she saw something she would never forget. In the middle of the chicken coop was a hunched figure over one of the chickens. The creature had an almost alien appearance. Spines running along its back, glowing red eyes that seemed to burn in the dark, and grayish skin that reflected the flashlight's beam. When it noticed her presence, it let out a high-pitched sound, almost like a baby's cry, before vanishing in an impressive leap into the darkness. That night was only the beginning for Carmen. By morning she found not just the attacked chicken but several others, all dead. The strangest part? There was no blood on the bodies. Just puncture marks on each of them, as if something had drained all their vital fluid with terrifying precision. I've never seen anything like it in my life, she told me, tears in her eyes. Another account that struck me was Luis's, a young man who worked as a night guard at a brick factory on the outskirts of town. He told me that during one of his rounds he heard something moving among the rubble. At first he thought it was a cat or a rat, but when he shone his flashlight he saw something he couldn't explain. It was small, but it didn't seem like it was from this world, he said, trembling as he described the encounter. Luis tried to follow it, but the creature was quick, agile, almost supernatural. The most unsettling part was what he found after the being disappeared: a group of dead goats on the neighboring property, all with the same puncture marks that had become synonymous with the attacks. That wasn't any ordinary animal, he repeated as if trying to convince himself. As the reports increased, people began avoiding going out at night. There was something in the darkness that seemed to watch, waiting for the right moment to strike. Some residents armed themselves with machetes and sticks, while others placed crucifixes and offerings on their properties, believing they could ward off the evil lurking in the town. But not all stories involved direct encounters. Some were even more sinister. Like the one about a boy named Javier, who swore he saw the creature outside his window. He described how it scratched the glass with its thin claws, as if testing the barrier between them. His parents didn't believe his account, but when they checked the yard the next morning, they found strange footprints in the soil, unlike anything they'd ever seen before. With every new report, the sense of fear and helplessness grew. It wasn't just the creature that scared people, it was the lack of answers. What was it? Where did it come from? And most importantly, what did it really want? Theories ranged from a mutant animal to secret government experiments. But no explanation seemed sufficient. And so the attacks continued, one after another, leaving a trail of death and mystery in their wake. The name Chupacabra began to circulate, gaining traction among the residents, as if naming the terror could make it less threatening. But deep down, everyone knew. Something was out there, something that defied logic and fed their nightmares. And the worst part? There was no way to know who would be the next victim. The more accounts I heard, the more the creature's image began to take shape in my mind. Everyone seemed to describe something similar, yet the details varied, like pieces of an incomplete puzzle. It was as if no one could look directly at the Chupacabra without their mind becoming confused, scrambled by fear and the strangeness of its appearance. The first thing everyone mentioned was its eyes. Those red, intense eyes glowing in the darkness, almost alive on their own. Witnesses said it was impossible to look away, as if the eyes had a hypnotic power, trapping the victim in a terrifying trance. Just hearing these descriptions sent a chill down my spine. Another striking feature was its skin. Witnesses said it was grayish or greenish, with a texture that resembled aged leather or in some cases reptilian scales. Some described dark patches scattered across its body, as if they were scars from ancient battles. Its appearance seemed to blend the natural world with something entirely alien. The spines running down its back were a detail few could forget. Tall, sharp, and lightly vibrating as the creature moved, they added an even more menacing air to the Chupacabra. Some said the spines seemed to emit an almost inaudible sound, like a faint hum, when the creature was nearby. Imagine being in the middle of nowhere, hearing that sound and knowing you were being watched. And then there were the teeth. No one could describe them precisely, as no one had the time to get a close look. But the marks left on the victims' bodies were enough to imagine. Deep, symmetrical punctures as if made by precision instruments. There was something predatory yet mechanical about the way the blood was extracted, as if the Chupacabra was more than just an animal. Its movement was another detail that intrigued me. Some people said it walked on two legs but could drop to all fours when it needed to gain speed. Others described its movements as quick and unpredictable, almost as if it were teleporting from one place to another. Those unlucky enough to chase it said it was impossible to keep up. It would vanish like a shadow in the night. There was something strange about its size too. Some said it was small, no bigger than a medium-sized dog. Others insisted it could change size, growing larger when it felt threatened. I knew fear could distort perceptions, but so many similar accounts made me wonder, could the Chupacabra be a mutable creature? Older accounts began to reveal additional details. Some swore the creature emitted unusual sounds, a mix of hisses and screeches. It wasn't a natural noise, not even animal-like. It was something almost electronic, as if it came from a poorly tuned radio. This sound, they said, preceded the attacks, like a macabre warning of what was to come. The smell was another thing many mentioned. A strong, acrid odor like ammonia or burning sulfur. They said the stench lingered in the air after it passed, like an invisible but unmistakable mark. I've smelled foul odors before, but the descriptions of the Chupacabra's scent had something inhuman about them, something that made me wonder if it truly belonged to this world. After gathering so many accounts, one thing became clear to me: the Chupacabra wasn't just a physical creature. It was a symbol of fear, a personification of something people couldn't comprehend. Its red eyes, spines, teeth, and impossible movements were terrifying, yes. But what it represented, the unknown, the inexplicable, was what truly left people paralyzed with fear. And the more I learned about it, the more I felt like something was watching me too, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. One night, I realized that the stories about the Chupacabra were more than urban legends. It was a hot, muggy evening, one of those nights where the silence feels heavy in the air. That was when I read about a case etched into the memory of every resident of a small village in Puerto Rico. It was a massive attack, shocking not only for its brutality but also for the unanswered questions it left behind. The story took place on an isolated farm owned by a man named Raul. He lived there with his wife and 2 children, raising goats, chickens, and pigs. On what seemed like an ordinary night, Raul was awakened by a shrill noise, like the sound of metal being dragged across the ground. He described it as if the sound was coming from all directions, as though something, or someone, was surrounding his home. With a flashlight and rifle in hand, Raul went outside to investigate. He started with the chicken coop, but upon opening the door, he was met with an eerie silence. The chickens, which usually clucked at the slightest movement, were all dead. They bore the same puncture marks that would become the Chupacabra's calling card. Raul reported that the ground was dry, as though all the blood had been drained from their bodies without leaving a trace. Turning toward the goat pen, Raul saw something that made him freeze in place. He described a small, hunched figure with intense red eyes that reflected the light from his flashlight. The creature had its back to him but twisted its head almost unnaturally, as if it could watch him without even moving. He tried to aim his rifle, but something about the creature's gaze paralyzed him. Before Raul could react, the creature made an impressive leap and vanished into the darkness. He ran back to his house, locked the doors, and gathered his family in one room. But the worst was yet to come. When the sun rose and Raul went out to assess the damage, he found all his animals dead. There were no signs of a struggle, just the same chilling marks. Once again, not a single drop of blood on the ground. Another story that gave me chills was about an entire village that witnessed an attack. This happened in a small settlement near the border between Puerto Rico and the forest. That night, a group of residents heard a noise coming from the woods. Curious and armed, they went to investigate. As they approached, they saw a figure standing upright, with spines running along its back and eyes that glowed in the dark like car headlights. The men tried to surround it, but the creature seemed to anticipate their every move, escaping with supernatural agility. Before they could react, they heard screams coming from a nearby house. When they arrived, they found a scene of horror. An entire goat pen was destroyed and the animals were, once again, dead with the same mysterious marks. Panic gripped the village. Children cried, women prayed, and the men armed themselves with whatever they could find. That night, no one slept. But the creature never returned. The mystery of what they had witnessed hung over the village like a dark cloud, leaving one unanswered question. Why had the Chupacabra chosen that place? Even stranger was the case of a woman named Clara, who swore she had been attacked by the Chupacabra while walking alone at night. She said she felt something touch her back, and when she turned around she saw what she described as a demon. Its eyes glowed like embers, and its claws lightly scratched her skin. She managed to escape by running, but she swore she could feel the creature's gaze following her all the way home. These cases and many others are what make the Chupacabra so terrifying. It's not just the animal deaths but the psychological impact it leaves behind. People who witness these attacks are never the same again. And as I gathered these stories, one thing became increasingly clear. The Chupacabra wasn't just a legend. It was a real threat, a predator leaving behind trails of fear and mystery wherever it went. As I delved deeper into the accounts of the Chupacabra, it became clear that this creature wasn't something that could be easily explained. But that didn't stop people from trying. Every theory I heard seemed more fantastic or disturbing than the last. Yet, amid all these possibilities, one question haunted me. What if one of them was true? One of the most popular explanations was that the Chupacabra was an unknown species, perhaps a mutation or a predator that had yet to be catalogued by science. Some believed it might be the result of secret genetic experiments conducted in hidden laboratories. And when I heard a local claim they saw strange lights in the sky shortly before an attack, an even more terrifying idea crossed my mind. Yes, the notion that the Chupacabra was not of this world was one of the most recurring theories. Many believed the creature was extraterrestrial in origin, a being sent to Earth to study or perhaps even feed on blood. The glowing eyes, impossible movements, and the almost electronic sound some witnesses reported only reinforced this theory. And I admit I couldn't help but wonder, if the Chupacabra was truly alien, what else might it be doing here? Other theories were rooted in older beliefs. The elders in town spoke of supernatural entities, spirits, or demons that took physical form to terrorize the living. The Chupacabra, they said, was a creature from the other side, a manifestation of forces humans were never meant to understand. These tales were often accompanied by prayers and blessings, as if merely speaking of it could summon its presence. But there were those who sought answers in science. A biologist I interviewed suggested the Chupacabra might simply be a common animal suffering from severe illness, like mange or rabies. He mentioned cases of coyotes or wild dogs found with appearances deformed by infections. However, he couldn't explain the precise attacks, the lack of blood, or the distinct markings. Another theory that caught my attention was that the Chupacabra might be a prehistoric predator that somehow survived to the present day, hiding in dense forests or remote caves. This would explain its stealthy nature and why it's never captured or clearly seen. Imagine something that evolved to feed on blood and completely avoid humans, but occasionally makes a mistake. The strangest theory, however, was that the Chupacabra was a deliberate creation, a biological experiment gone wrong. Some people spoke of secret military bases in Puerto Rico where biological weapons might be developed. One mistake, one escape, and now the creature was loose, terrorizing rural areas. The government, of course, never confirmed anything, but there were those who swore they saw uniformed men scouting attack sites shortly after incidents occurred. As I spoke to more people, I realized that each theory revealed more about the fears of those who told them than about the creature itself. The Chupacabra's origin was such a profound mystery that everyone projected their own anxieties onto it. The unknown is, after all, the greatest monster. And that's what made the Chupacabra so terrifying. It represented everything we didn't understand and couldn't control. But there was something even more unsettling about all these theories. They all shared one common thread. The Chupacabra seemed to always be lurking, as if it were studying us. It wasn't just a creature of instinct. It appeared to have a purpose. And the more I listened to these stories, the more I wondered, are we looking at it the wrong way? Perhaps, in trying to understand its origin, we're ignoring its true intention. In the end, no theory is definitive. The Chupacabra remains an enigma. A legend? An unknown animal? A visitor from another world? I don't know. But one thing is certain. As long as these accounts exist, as long as there's fear of venturing out at night, the Chupacabra will live on. Not just in the forests or the farms, but in our minds, where it hides, waiting for the right moment to strike again. As I delved deeper into the mystery of the Chupacabra, I realized that, beyond the scary stories and theories, there were records, images, videos, and even physical traces. These pieces of evidence promised answers, but instead they raised even more questions. It was like looking at a puzzle where the pieces never quite fit together. And each new discovery made me question what was really true. The first video I watched was made by a farmer in a mountainous region of Puerto Rico. He filmed something strange running across the field, too fast to be a regular animal. The footage was grainy, like almost all videos documenting the unexplained, but you could make out something slender, with elongated limbs and a hunched posture. When the farmer brought the camera closer, the creature stopped and stared directly into the lens. Those red eyes, glowing in the dark, seemed to pierce through the screen, staring back at me. But the video wasn't the only evidence. In another case, a team of researchers collected DNA samples from a farm where several animals had been attacked. The strangest thing was that the results didn't point to anything conclusive. The genetic material had characteristics of known species, but it also had sequences that the scientists couldn't identify. It was like a mix that shouldn't exist, something impossible. There were also photos. Many of them showed the bodies of the victims: goats, chickens, even some dogs. The marks were always the same. Precise punctures as if made by a surgical tool. And, more disturbing, the total absence of blood. Some of these images were so graphic they made me look away, but what intrigued me was the pattern. It was as if the creature had a method, a purpose. One of the most intriguing pieces of evidence came from a woman named Teresa, who lived on a farm in Mexico. She reported finding a trail of footprints after an attack. The marks were unlike anything she'd ever seen. Feet with 3 long toes, with claws that dug deeply into the ground. Teresa took photos of the footprints and even tried to preserve them with plaster. But inexplicably, the marks disappeared days later, as if they had never existed. Another account that gave me chills was from a retired police officer who claimed to have pursued the Chupacabra. He swore he had seen the creature up close while patrolling a rural area after a series of attacks. According to him, The creature had a pungent, almost toxic odor that seemed to make the air heavy around it. He tried to photograph it, but when he reviewed the images, they were completely blurred, as if something had interfered with the camera. I also came across an audio recording made by a group of campers who accidentally came across what they believed was the Chupacabra. In the recording you can hear a series of strange noises, a high-pitched, almost electronic sound mixed with a low grunt. The audio cuts off abruptly with the campers screaming and running. They never returned to that spot, but the sound remained as a permanent reminder of the terrifying encounter. But not all the evidence was physical. Some were testimonies that provided chilling details. Like the account of a man who described the creature staring directly at him, as if it were analyzing its next victim. That look, he told me, wasn't from an animal. It was something more intelligent, as if it understood the fear it was causing me. Just hearing those words made my heart race. And then there were the gaps in the evidence, the lack of clear videos, the disappearance of physical proof, as if something or someone was trying to cover up the existence of the Chupacabra. Was this creature really so elusive? Or were there greater forces at play trying to prevent the truth from coming to light? This mystery only made everything even more unsettling. In the end, the evidence made one thing clear. The Chupacabra, whatever it was real to those who encountered it. The videos and accounts were fragments of a larger puzzle, but none of them seemed to reveal the full picture. And as I examined each piece of evidence, I felt like something was watching me from the shadows, as if the Chupacabra itself knew I was trying to uncover its secret. As I delved deeper into the Chupacabra stories, something inside me began to change. It was as if the Chupacabra was no longer just a distant legend but was drawing closer to my reality. This became even more evident when I started talking to people who swore they had direct encounters with the creature. These accounts were not just frightening, they were visceral, filled with emotion and fear, as if the people were reliving the moment as they spoke. One of the most striking stories came from a man named Diego, a farmer who lived alone in a remote area of Mexico. He told me that one night, he heard a strange noise coming from the pen where he kept his goats. It was a metallic sound mixed with a low hissing, something he had never heard before. Intrigued, Diego grabbed a lantern and went to investigate. When he reached the pen, he froze. In the shadows, there was a hunched figure with pale skin and spines protruding from its back. Diego described its eyes as two rubies glowing in the dark. The creature was hunched over one of his goats, which was already motionless on the ground. He tried to scream, but fear paralyzed him. All he could do was slowly retreat while the creature continued to feed. Another account that sent chills down my spine came from Clara, a young woman who lived near a dense forest area in Puerto Rico. She said that she was riding her bike home at dusk when she felt something strange, as if she was being watched. When she turned her head, she saw a tall, slender figure running beside her in the woods, matching her speed. Clara pedaled as hard as she could, but when she got home, she realized the creature had disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Some encounters were even more disturbing. In a village in the countryside of Guatemala, a group of children was playing near a field when they said they saw a small, hunchbacked creature walking on two legs. They described it as something between a reptile and a bat. When they started to scream, the creature took flight, disappearing into the night sky, leaving a metallic scent in the air. However, the story of Rodrigo was the one that haunted me the most. He told me that he was camping with some friends in a mountainous region when, in the middle of the night, he was woken by a strange noise. When he opened the tent, he saw the creature just a few meters away. Rodrigo described it as having a jaw full of sharp teeth and a piercing gaze. He slowly moved back into the tent, but before he could zip it up, the creature let out a shriek so high-pitched that he felt his ears ringing. Then it vanished into the darkness. As I listened to these accounts, I began to notice a pattern. In every case, the creature seemed more curious than aggressive, as if it was studying the people it encountered. But this curiosity was unsettling, almost predatory, as if it was deciding when and where to strike. It wasn't just the sight of the Chupacabra that terrified the witnesses, but the feeling of being analyzed, assessed. Many of these people reported having nightmares after their encounters, dreams in which the creature's red eyes followed them, even as they ran or hid. Some said they felt like something was watching them for weeks, even during the day. It was as if the Chupacabra had left more than a physical impression. It seemed to mark people in a way that no one could explain. These close encounters made me question even more. What is the Chupacabra? A predator, yes, but with a terrifying intelligence, almost human. What if it's not just attacking by instinct but with a purpose? And even more disturbing, why has it never been caught or definitively recorded? Are we dealing with something that doesn't belong to our world? In the end, as I compiled these accounts, I realized that there was something more terrifying than the encounters themselves: the uncertainty. Not knowing when or where it might appear again, or if it is watching right now. As I told these stories, a growing sense of being watched began to rise within me. And that's what makes the Chupacabra so terrifying. It's not just what it does, but what it makes us feel. I never imagined that one day I would be on a real hunt. When I started my investigation into the Chupacabra, the idea of confronting it seemed absurd. It was like a distant nightmare, something that happened to other people in remote places. But a series of events led me to a point where, without realizing it, I was about to become part of the story. The story of someone who tried and failed to hunt the Chupacabra. The first sign that things were becoming more personal happened on a rainy night when I was reviewing the images and reports I had collected. Suddenly the phone rang. It was a raspy, hurried voice. I saw it. It's coming here. The man on the other end didn't introduce himself, but there was no doubt, he was talking about the Chupacabra. I couldn't ignore it, so I grabbed my camera and headed to the location he mentioned. When I arrived, the tension in the air was palpable. The ground was wet from the rain, and the thick vegetation made the path even harder to cross. When I asked the man where he had seen it, he pointed to a dark clearing, where the metallic smell in the air was unbearably strong. What bothered me more than just the sense of impending danger was the silence. Everything was too quiet, as if even nature was hiding. We went to the center of the clearing where he swore he had seen the Chupacabra. There were no obvious signs, no footprints, no bite marks. But something told me it had been there, or maybe still was. The idea that the creature might be watching us from some dark point in the forest made me shudder. I looked around more carefully, but as always, nothing but shadows. That's when I heard a sound. A snap, as if something was breaking dry branches in the darkness. The man next to me tensed up, and I could see the fear etched on his face. The sound seemed to move around us, circling, creating a sense of being hunted. I raised my camera, trying to capture any movement, but the camera was shaking in my hands. I knew this was more than just a hunt. The air grew heavier. The metallic smell I had noticed before was now overwhelming, as if it was saturating the air. I didn't know what was happening, but something inside me told me the Chupacabra was much closer than I had imagined. A cold sensation ran down my spine and fear took over me. Never, in all my life, had I felt such fear, the kind of primal fear that comes with the realization that you are being hunted. Suddenly, a slender figure appeared between the trees. It was fast, moving with supernatural agility. I barely had time to react before I saw a pair of red eyes glowing in the darkness. It wasn't just a glance. It was as if those eyes were seeing me, studying me, as if they knew exactly who I was and what I was doing there. My heart raced, and for a moment, everything around me went completely silent. Before I could even think of running, the creature disappeared into the darkness. No sounds, no traces. It seemed to have dematerialized, as if it had never been there. I was paralyzed, my mind trying to process what had just happened. That encounter was like a nightmare where reality and fantasy mixed. It was real, I knew it, but it also seemed impossible. The feeling of being watched never left me for a second. I felt, with unsettling certainty, that the Chupacabra had been watching us the whole time, waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to stay calm, but the pressure of knowing it was so close, so near, consumed me from the inside. The fear didn't come from what I had already seen. It came from what could still happen. When we finally left the forest, the man next to me was silent, as if he were in shock. I was too, but with the feeling that the Chupacabra had won that hunt. It had shown us how powerless we were against it, how vulnerable we were. And when I looked back, one last thing stayed in my mind. The creature hadn't attacked us, yet. Maybe it was just toying with us, waiting for the perfect moment for its real hunt. When I started my research on the Chupacabra, I never imagined it would lead me down such a dark path. I thought I was just chasing a legend, something mythical like so many other stories spread across the world. But the more I investigated, the more the figure of the Chupacabra became something bigger, something that connected to forces and mysteries I could barely comprehend. There came a point when I realized that, perhaps, I was dealing with something much darker than just a legendary creature. It all started when I found an old article, a document that talked about genetic experiments conducted in secret locations during the 1970s. It mentioned hybrid creatures, modified to withstand the hostile environments of other parts of the world. The Chupacabra, or whatever it was, could have been one of these experiments, a product of biological manipulations made by those seeking absolute power. The idea that the creature could be a human creation made me question everything I knew about legends and myths. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The fact that the Chupacabra had such distinct characteristics from any known animal. Its red eyes, its supernatural speed, its ability to hide in the shadows. All of this began to make more sense from this perspective. What if the Chupacabra wasn't a natural creature, but rather a mistake, or worse, a weapon? What if it was the consequence of something made by human hands, something that had gotten out of control? The most disturbing part was when I found a secret correspondence between two scientists who had worked on a project called Operation Eclipse. On the paper, they discussed the possible use of genetic modifications in animals to create beings adaptable to different climates. The text was full of technical jargon, but what shocked me was the mention of an experiment that went wrong. A predatory being, extremely intelligent, created to hunt and feed on blood. The correspondence was signed by two people whose names I couldn't trace. But the descriptions they contained, of physical characteristics that resembled what I knew about the Chupacabra, were too frightening to ignore. I started asking myself, what if the Chupacabra was a biological weapon? What if it was more than just a creature, but the result of human attempts to create an unbeatable predatory force? That night, when I took a moment to step away from the research, a strange feeling took over me. As if, somehow, I had touched something I shouldn't have. I felt like something was watching me, and the unease grew as the idea of genetic manipulation took root in my mind. It wasn't just a story. It was a secret, something someone wanted to keep buried. And I was beginning to uncover it. I spoke with some experts in genetics and biology, trying to find more information about similar experiments. The answers were evasive, but there was one constant. They all seemed uncomfortable with my curiosity. I began to wonder if I was getting closer to something that would be better left unknown. But a part of me knew that the truth, no matter how dark, needed to be revealed. The dark theory about the Chupacabra, now so vivid in my mind, expanded. It wasn't just a solitary creature hunting animals, but something much more complex. What if the Chupacabra was being controlled? What if it was part of a bigger plan, a tool used by someone or some organization to spread chaos and confusion? What started as a story about a mythical monster now seemed to be transforming into a global conspiracy. When I started putting the pieces together, I realized that the descriptions of the Chupacabra varied by location, but all the reports had one thing in common. The creature never seemed to attack directly, but always in a pattern, as if it knew exactly when and where to cause the most impact. This made me think of a machine, a biological weapon capable of operating under command. It was clear to me now, the Chupacabra wasn't just a monster, it was a lost experiment, a weapon that had escaped. And so, the line between myth and reality became more and more blurred. I no longer knew whether the Chupacabra was a nightmare creature, or if it was a reflection of the shadows of the world we live in, a world where the boundaries between science and monsters may be thinner than we imagine. I was hunting a monster, but maybe it was the monster that was hunting me. Everything I had learned about the Chupacabra, all the stories, images and theories, started to unravel before me, like a puzzle that refused to be pieced together. I felt lost, trapped in a labyrinth of mysteries and incomplete answers. The most disturbing thing was no longer what I knew about the creature, but what I still didn't know, and worse, what I had begun to fear. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was wrong. Something beyond the Chupacabra. I was being pulled into an abyss of answers I could no longer control. Everything I had done up to that point seemed in vain, a desperate attempt to understand something that, deep down, was incomprehensible. And yet, the creature was still there in the shadows, waiting. I returned to the spot where I had my encounter with the Chupacabra. The forest was silent, almost unsettling, and the trees seemed to bend under the weight of the night. The memory of that encounter haunted me. I knew it was nearby, though I couldn't see it. The feeling of being watched grew within me like a shadow, and paranoia took over my thoughts. The presence of the creature still lingered in the air. That night, while walking through the terrain, I saw something that froze me. A footprint, a deep mark in the ground, with claws that seemed to have been made by something much larger than any animal I knew. I crouched down, touching the damp earth. The soil was cold, but the impression left there seemed fresh, as if the creature was still very close. I felt my stomach churn. I was in its territory. My lantern's light flickered with the wind, and I heard a snap behind me. It was a dry leaf being crushed beneath something heavy. My heart raced, and I spun around quickly, pointing the lantern into the darkness. I saw nothing, but the fear I felt was palpable, as if the air itself had turned dense and charged with tension. I no longer knew if I was hunting the Chupacabra or if it was hunting me. At that moment, the sound of a low, heavy breath cut through the silence. It came from behind a tree, so soft it almost seemed like a breeze. But something in the frequency of that sound made my blood freeze. I knew I was no longer alone. The Chupacabra was there, in the darkness, watching. And then it moved. The creature appeared in a swift motion, so agile that before I could react, it was already at my side. Its red eyes gleamed in the night, reflecting the light of the lantern, and for the first time I saw, in all its terrifying glory, the true face of the Chupacabra. It wasn't just a predator but something more. Something intelligent, with malice reflected in every move. The creature stared at me, and in that gaze, I saw evil in its purest form. It was studying me like a hunter examines its prey before attacking. I didn't know whether to run or remain still. But before I could make any decision, the creature took a step back and disappeared into the shadows. The silence returned, but it was different now. Fear had infiltrated every cell of my body, and I knew the Chupacabra hadn't spared me. It was just waiting. That night changed me forever. I had found the Chupacabra, or maybe it was he who had found me. No matter how much I tried to understand what was happening, I realized the monster wasn't just a legend. It was real, and it was closer than anyone could imagine. But what haunted me the most was the feeling that the Chupacabra wasn't just hunting. It was testing me, challenging my understanding of what is real. As I returned to my home that cold morning, still feeling the weight of the creature's presence in my bones, one question hammered in my head. What if the Chupacabra wasn't just a creature, but a reflection of our deepest fears? Something that was always lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike, to remind us of our fragility in the face of the unknown. I no longer knew what was real or what was just an illusion fed by fear. But one thing I knew for certain: the Chupacabra wasn't just a legend. It was what happens when fear takes form,